Welcome to Amplify, the podcast for accounting firm growth. I'm your host, Chris Camara. Today we're discussing content that converts with Anna Khayet, the founder of KMG Advisors, where she partners with fintech founders intent on achieving aggressive growth goals. She also serves as the CMO of Paget Business Services, which is a tax accounting and consulting company with more than 300 locations in the United States. Anna will discuss content in the digital lead gen process. Thank you, Anna, so much for coming on the show today. But before we jump right into the questions, why don't you tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Anna. And as Chris said, I have a fractional CMO consultancy, if you want to call it that. I work with fintech companies who market to accountants, companies who market to small business owners. And I feel that just because they can't necessarily afford a full-time marketing team right now, doesn't mean that they shouldn't have access to best-in-class marketing resources. And so I collaborate with subject matter experts in design, marketing operations, writing, the full marketing stack to really bring excellence to these companies pretty early on.
Roll out the red carpet. Celebrate your professionals. Be seen. At Ingenuity Marketing Group, we personalize your approach to attract talent and win business. In our world, accounting professionals are the celebrities. That means branding, PR, and content that ranks you higher. For visibility, faster marketing ROI, and more time in your day, contact our in-house specialists at ingenuitymarketing.com.
Great. So let's go dive right in. So first, let's talk in an overall sense about content. What should we be thinking about when it comes to content people want to engage with?
Yeah, so I think this is where it's always helpful to start with yourself, right? And think about, like, just as a human being, what is content that you will find engaging and interesting, right? And so, in your day, you are so constrained on time. You have things that are on your mind, right? You have things that bother you, things that you struggle with. And so when you look at content out there, it needs to directly speak to you. It needs to hook you in. And frankly, it needs to be visually pleasing, right? I mean, isn't that the fundamental thing we do in marketing, is that we position and we package something and we put it in its best light. We help that product or that service really put its best foot forward. And what that means is that we can meet people's needs, right? And so our content should really do that same thing. It should add value and help them solve that big problem that they're struggling with.
So how do you make content that converts, though? So what sets apart content that people will interact with?
So when you think about content, I find that it's helpful to really start with like a core idea, right? So if we know, for example, right, that let's just take small businesses as a target audience, it probably is for many accounting firms. The small business will probably not be here in 2 to 3 years. And when it comes down to it, right, there's a number of very common reasons that happens. And they come down to things like just poor financial literacy, right? The business owner, I mean, yeah, they understand what a bank account is, but do they really understand what it means to manage their cash flow and their receivables? Like, do they understand, compound interest rate? Do they understand tax regulations? Are they getting the best interest rates on their account, right? There's a whole other level of financial literacy that they need to have in order to survive. And many of them don't, right? And so in so much as like really just having enough cash on hand is the reason that many of them don't make it, it also comes back to financial literacy. And so when we talk about the type of content that converts, and we think about, well, what are the pain points that these business owners have? This is it, right? This is that big pain point. And so any content that you create for the business owner really has to come back to that pain point that they have. How can you help them solve it? How can your content just address it, right? I mean, if we start thinking about it from this point, now the next thing we probably want to do is understand, okay, so we know what they're struggling with. We know many of them are like running payroll at the last minute, because we know that, for example, searches for payroll terms tend to spike, right, like in the middle of the night on Friday. We can then go back and we can look at search volume, right? So what does organic search volume look like for terms that are relevant? It could be terms that your site is getting impressions for. It doesn't really matter where you rank, but if you're getting a lot of impressions, that's probably a search term that people are looking for. It's probably a pain point or a question or a challenge that they have. So now you have that in hand. And now I'm not talking about like keyword stuffing your content, but I'm using that as a really good starting point to think about, oh, this is content that they're going to be searching for, number one. So it's good for SEO. They're going to find it relevant. It's going to speak to their pain points. So that's where I would really begin. And I think that's the first place to start to orient your content towards not something that's reflective of your firm or maybe the way that your organization is set up, right? Maybe you have different practice areas. Think about it from the user's perspective, right? And right there, we've gotten a big lift and much higher likelihood of our content converting.
Okay, so it's not about you, it's about them. That's what I'm hearing. So yeah, so what different types of content should firms have and how do they use them?
So it comes back, I mean, and I think that that's a great question, but it comes back to, okay, so let's establish that there's a couple of core content pillars that we want to pursue. Like we've identified what are the pain points that our users have, you know, there's going to be commonalities. So say like poor financial literacy is one pillar. Say managing cash flow is a second pillar. There's probably a third pillar, right? And again, I'm talking about the very like small business here. There's a lot more complexity and like interesting problems as you get bigger as a business, right? But we really should start by establishing, you know, these content pillars. And then all of our content is going to come from that. And they have to, these pillars, they have to be really broad. And I'm happy to share like offline, you know, just don't hesitate to reach out. But I can show you examples of content pillars, right? So like, what are they? And then all of our content is going to ultimately come back to those. And so once you have those pillars defined, you can start to think about like this idea, right? And how it plays out. Now, at a minimum, it can play out as an infographic. It can play out as a blog post, right? The same idea can be explored in many different ways. So let's just take this idea of financial literacy because it's, why not? It can be a listicle, like the top 10 financial literacy terms that business owners don't know. It can be a quiz. It can be a whole white paper. It can be a case study. Like it can be, you know, a video, right? There's so many different formats that the content could come to life that are best suited for different platforms. Sometimes I think about like, not to use marketing jargon, but like synergies, right? So there's a lot of synergies there. So if, for example, we take this idea, right, and we want to do a broadcast. Now, there are platforms out there like StreamYard. StreamYard's really cool. What is it? It's a broadcasting platform. So you could take, say, a client, right, who should serve as an example to your other clients or your other leads, and you can do an interview with them and just use the StreamYard broadcasting studio. Well, now you've just created many different content formats. You've created a podcast, you've created essentially a webinar, right? You can take the transcript and use ChatGPT to convert it into a blog post, right? It's a website page, like you name it. You've just amplified the reach of your content by 10x, and you haven't really done that 10 times the work.
So you spoke about video, but a lot of firms struggle with how to use that. So how should we be thinking about video usage? And, you know, while we're at it, you might as well include audio because there's more podcasts today than ever before. So can you illuminate that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, I think video, we have to think about video carefully because, again, like being mindful of people's attention spans, right? And so there's really high production quality video, like the kind that costs $5,000 for a 1.5 minute video. And think about those as like explainer videos on your site, right? Like those are worth investing in because they have a really long shelf life and they help oftentimes articulate abstract concepts. Like I have clients in the technology sector where what they do is just really hard to understand. So for for example, they use AI algorithms. So how do you like communicate that to customers? So you have to sometimes like you have to like embody it somehow through animation, right? Or illustration. And so for them, like that high production quality video that's going to just really increase conversion on their site makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of, think about that as like one video format. Now, you might have another video format, which is a live broadcast. And there, like you can do those on Facebook, you can do those on LinkedIn, you can you can do those on YouTube, you can stream to many platforms. And so when you're creating those, think about the fact that they're going to be viewed sometimes more often in the post fact than in the live. Now, specifically with LinkedIn, like you could do that LinkedIn live video, right? And so great, like that actually is a great way to generate leads. So if there's like a new regulation that's coming down the pike, or there's some like question that's been coming up again and again for one of your practices, right? That's actually a really great opportunity, as an aside, for you to connect with your practice leader. So what questions are they getting again and again from clients? Those are great material to then create like a LinkedIn Live or a YouTube video about that topic. And so when you advertise that LinkedIn Live, you're going to generate a lot of leads that way. Most of them won't attend the live recording, but you could send them, sorry, the live stream, but you could send them the recording after. When you broadcast it to YouTube, there's a lot of how-to searches that happen on YouTube. Oftentimes it's business owners trying to like navigate QuickBooks. Sometimes it's the finance team trying to navigate NetSuite. Like the best marketing in some ways that NetSuite does for itself is the little videos that they have on YouTube or that people have created of how to, because NetSuite is really darn complicated, right? And so when you start to put out how-to content on YouTube, think of it as an SEO play, right? Like YouTube content is getting indexed in Google search. YouTube is a massive search engine within itself, right? And so video can be a really great converting platform for you as well. Now with audio, it's challenging. So I think there's podcast advertising. I have a mixed, I think that if you go into podcast creation, like whether you decide to be a guest on a podcast, sponsor a podcast and be a guest, whatever that looks like for you, like I think you have to go in to your budget owner, right? Whoever's giving you marketing budget, like you have to go in very clear that it's going to be a brand awareness play. Like it's unlikely to generate leads. I mean, you could put short links in there, do what you will, but I've just found it like I would report on it as downloads per episode, like you're probably not, it's not a great lead gen tactic is the short of it.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about gated content, because I'm noticing that more companies are not putting their content behind a gate, meaning, people don't have to put their email address in to access it. So why is that happening, and when should you continue to gate your content?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, right? Because like, how do you strike that right balance? On one hand, you want to capture the contact information. On the other hand, like you don't want to stop people from, enjoying your content. And then you're also concerned that if you gate it, well, they're just going to abandon it. And so I guess like, I think, and this is probably common sense and you already know this, but you want to put really great content that you've put hours and hours of work into, content that's been highly curated, well designed, well thought out, like the content that has performed, that in the lighter versions of it, like in the blog post version of it has performed really well, right? And so I work with a company, Row, and they put out this content about CFOs that are joining private equity backed companies. And it's a very thoughtful white paper. And so they put that behind a sign up wall, and it's doing great. Like, it's really performing for them. It's like pinned to the top of their LinkedIn because it's doing so well. Right. So I think to me, that's an example of content where, like, yeah, you should probably gate that. Like, you shouldn't give everything away for free.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's talk about something that we're all talking about lately, and that's Gen AI and ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff. Now, not a day goes by where we don't hear about that, right? So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about copy that's generated by AI? Can it convert?
Yep. So I think a lot of us are really building, like a lot of us marketers, a lot of us human beings are really building up our I don't know, AI generated content radars, right? Like I would argue that many of us can probably spot the AI generated content at this point. And
Yes.
and I to contrast that, like, unfortunately we are seeing a lot of like very talented copywriters becoming free agents because companies think that they can replace them with AI, and in my experience it's just not true. Like, the copywriter can always use generative AI as a good starting point, but I think if anything the bar is higher for like thoughtful human generated content than it ever has been. And so look, like, I think generative AI has a big role to play. Like, you can ask it for ideas, you can ask it for outlines, you can ask it to like give you options. I mean, I use it for my kids' math homework. I've actually broken ChatGPT that way a couple times. Um, so it's a good starting point for you and for the copywriter. But I think if anything, like, the alternative is true. And now people, if they haven't already, will come to really value human generated content going forward.
That's so good to hear from some, especially by someone who is a human who writes copy. So I can appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking the same thing. So, any final tips for the listeners that will help them improve the ROI from their content?
Yeah. So there's and I can't recall the exact stat, but I want to say there's many that kind of are to the same effect, which is that it takes like 8 to 9 touches to get a prospect to convert, right? So there's not going to be this one piece of content, this one silver bullet that is going to convert for you. I would encourage as much as possible to think about your particular user's journey, right? So maybe they're curious about working with you to start. Maybe actually they're not in the market for an accountant at all, but they might have a crisis down the road. Like, someone might quit, someone might retire, and then boom, they have a need immediately, right? And so there's like this user journey that happens, and then you need to qualify them, you need to talk about pricing, they need to understand what you do and don't do as a firm. And so create content that kind of speaks to people where they're at in their journey, and measure the performance of content that way. So I think, to the degree that you can, like, build out the marketing infrastructure to do that. And what I mean there is, like, whether you use Salesforce or HubSpot or some other CRM, like, set up life cycle stages for your contacts. How are, like, you can ask them to self-report. Where are they in their life cycle, right? And then create content that really speaks to where they're at, track their engagement with it, and then it becomes much more likely that, like, you're top of mind when they're in market, and that they end up converting, right? So, like, long story short, I wouldn't try to put the onus on one piece of content. And I think it's very challenging because when you work with your stakeholders who are, practice leaders, firm owners, they're often impatient with marketing, especially digital marketing. Like they want to know like why they're putting in the work to review content, why maybe they've been on a podcast and it still hasn't translated to leads. I think you need to be able to say like, look, like if your goal is to generate leads, I can do that, but it's going to be expensive and inefficient, right? Like we have to do the brand awareness thing and the content and the nurture. We have to keep doing that. And then you'll see that like the leads will come and it'll be like they'll find us. Like it'll look like they came from organic search, but really they came because we've been coming at them all this time.
Such a great tip. Thank you so much for all of your great comments. You've really given me a lot to think about for sure. And I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much. So Anna, why don't you tell the audience how to get in touch with you or to learn more about KMG Advisors?
Yeah, for sure. I'm always happy to chat marketing. Have been marketing alongside Paget for a while now. Paget is the accounting franchise. And so, yeah, if you please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to chat. My email is Anna, ANNA, at kmgadvisors.com. That's advisors with an E, because that was the free domain. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. That's it for another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting firm growth. A big thanks to all of you for listening in today. If you like what you heard, please give us a review. We'd love it on the podcast platform you're listening to now. And be sure to listen to the other episodes in the Digital Lead Gen season. You can learn more about Amplify and our past seasons on accountingmarketing.org. Look for the podcast under publications. If you want to learn more about me, reach out on LinkedIn at Chris Camara. That's Chris with a C and CAMARA, or email me at ccamara@ipainsider.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you join us for another episode soon.